Will Cuylle rescues the Rangers with 2 goals and a wild 4-3 win over the Columbus Blue Jackets. Did Cuylle also save jobs and or extend the careers of certain long-tenured Rangers? We debate on today's episode.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1244 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you will score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So just an absolute roller coaster of a hockey game that fits in pretty nicely with what we can also call, maybe even charitably call, a roller coaster of a season for the New York Rangers. And I say charitably because it feels like there's probably been a few more valleys than peaks this year. But the bottom line, Rangers got a win that they absolutely, positively needed to get here going into the 2-week break. You're playing a Columbus Blue Jackets team that's in front of you in the standings. You're trying to track them down. The Rangers actually got a boatload of help across the NHL on this night. Basically, every team that's in this really tight race for the wild card, the 2 wild card spots, just about all of them lost in regulation. So that's obviously positive news. And the Rangers themselves, of course, took care of business here. And one of the biggest reasons why was, of course, Will Cuylle coming up with the game-tying goal and the game-winning goal in the third period. That's another thing that you have to like about this game. There's a lot of positive things you could take out of this game. There's a lot of negative things you could take out of this game, too, if you're a fan of the Rangers. And some of the bad habits that the Rangers have had pretty much the entire season, some of them did rear their ugly heads. But again, I think we owe it to ourselves to enjoy this one, because enjoyable, come from behind, dramatic wins like this have been few and far between for the Rangers this season. They've gotten to be a little bit more commonplace ever since we flipped the calendar to 2025, but be that as it may, they just haven't had the magic this year the way that they have last year, or the way that they did last year. But bottom line, Will Cuylle, again, coming up clutch for the Rangers. He's out there on the second line with Vincent Trocheck and Alexis Lafreniere. And we're going to talk about this trio a little bit later, as well as all of the new look Ranger line combinations. Going to have a lot to say about that, because it felt like names out of a hat in some ways. I'll try to make some sense out of it a little bit later. But yeah, a real Jekyll and Hyde night for this Will Cuylle line, once again with Trocheck and Lafreniere. They seemingly forgot how to backcheck. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, too, where I call out the Rangers for their lack of backchecking pretty much the entire season, and certainly in this game as well. But then this line, this trio of players here, they're on the ice. They produce, once again, the game-tying goal, the game-winning goal. And one of the biggest questions that I have after watching this game, seeing the Rangers win it in dramatic fashion, is, did Will Cuylle potentially save people's jobs and or extend the career of certain Ranger players, or their career on the Rangers at least, and essentially prevent them from being traded? I think all that's at least possible. And depending on where you are with this team and what you want from the rest of the season and what you'd like to see from this team, next season and beyond. I know a lot of people are kind of starting to turn the page and fixate on next season, and I can certainly understand why. For me, I still got to root for my team. It's just the way I'm wired. I don't have it in me to sit here and root against the Rangers. I know that they drive you crazy. I know that there's a lot of players that have certainly underachieved this year, and we've certainly called out a lot of those players, the entire team, individual players, et cetera, on this podcast. But when it comes right down to it, I want to see the Rangers win. I want to see them do well. I want to see them succeed. I want to see them give us some fun down the stretch of the season, because this, just speaking as a fan, I love hosting this podcast, but if I put on my fan hat and just look at this whole season together, this hasn't been like really all that fun of a season. There's been, like I said, more downs than ups, and I want them to ultimately find a way to get into the dance and at least give themselves a shot. But as for the question of Will Cuylle potentially saving jobs here to bring everything full circle, Peter Laviolette, we talked about him a little bit in our last episode, and my theory there was that a win here would certainly mean that Peter Laviolette will be the Ranger coach coming out of this 2-week break that they're about to go on here. But had they lost it, I think it's at least possible that he would be on the hot seat, and at least possible the Rangers would look to make a change. I mean, they do have the 2-week break, like I just mentioned, and it just hasn't been a good season. By all metrics, by all eye tests, this team has underachieved and hasn't come anywhere close to what they did last season. So if the Rangers lose their 2 straight games before the break and say they play poorly in this game here and they lose this game in lackluster fashion, yeah, I think Peter Laviolette could have seriously been on the hot seat. And I realize he survived 4-19 earlier in the year, so maybe he would survive this as well. But Laviolette's job security greatly increased thanks to this win and thanks to Will Cuyle's performance getting the 2 goals that he got here. And as for some of his teammates, Cuylle may have gotten some of them off of the hook as well. That's not to say that the Rangers can't and won't, make a trade or two during this 2-week break here. That's still at least possible. But it's also possible that the Rangers look to press ahead with what they've got and just find a way to get into the dance. And again, we can debate whether that's the best strategy or not. If I'm the Rangers, if I'm Chris Drury, even with this win, even with the fact that this team has played better in January and February, certainly than they did in November and December, I'm still looking to move at least the impending UFAs, because the 3 that are easy to single out because of their contract status and because of the fact that they are UFAs at the end of the season are Vesey, Lindgren, and Smith. I think I would still probably look to move some, if not all 3 of those guys, because I'm not convinced that there's going to be all that much of a downgrade by the players that would replace them. I could see you call up Brandon Hoffman maybe to take Riley Smith's spot. And I mean, who knows how that's going to go, but there's only one way to find out. Vesey, he was on the top line. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Somebody could step in there for him, whether it's Brett Berard, whenever he gets healthy, or, maybe a bottom 6 type forward from Hartford. And as for Lindgren, I mean, they could put in Zach Jones. They seem to be really reluctant to do that unless they're absolutely forced to, but that would at least be an option. And I don't think the Rangers would be all that hurt by shipping out any of those 3 players. I could be wrong about that, but that's just kind of where I'm at with it right now. But as for Will Cuylle, yeah, absolutely huge. Great individual effort on the first of his 2 goals, the one that tied the game early in the 3rd period. By the way, great individual effort. How many times have I used that phrase this season? Not very often. It sounds very unique that I'm saying it here, but that's what it was. He's got the puck in the O-zone. He's kind of circling near the top of the zone, just inside the blue line there, and he gets held. There's a penalty coming, but he keeps going. Will Cuylle just keeps moving his legs, and then he fires a shot at the net and gets through Merzlikins into the net. There was some traffic in front. Lafreniere was there. I think Trocheck was in there too, and that ties the game for the Rangers. Great individual effort by Will Cuylle. And then on the game winner, you've got, a minute 30 to go, whatever it is, give or take a couple of seconds either way. I think it was like 1:39, something like that. But you got Vincent Trocheck applying pressure on the forecheck. Columbus has the puck. They try to make a pass. Trocheck is able to deflect the pass ever so slightly, and then it bounces off the sideboards, goes right to Will Cuylle, and he hammers it home, gives the Rangers the 4-3 lead, and ultimately the 4-3 win. And I forgot to check this before I hit record, but they were calling that an unassisted goal for Will Cuylle. And, I would have to watch the replay again, but I was pretty sure that Trocheck redirected that pass. Even if he didn't, though, he was applying the pressure. He was forcing the issue. He made it happen, and Will Cuylle able to capitalize and, continue to be one of the, honestly, few bright spots that the Rangers have had this season. I mean, how many things can you really point at this here? I know they just got a great win. I don't want to do this the entire episode, but we're looking at the season as a whole as well. We have to do that given that the Rangers are, a bubble playoff team right now. How many other things can you point to this season and think like, yeah, that's a big time positive for this team, or, that bodes well for the Rangers going forward? There aren't a whole lot, but Will Cuylle is certainly one of them. For me, talked about this before too, but hands down the front runner for the Stephen McDonald Extra Effort Award. And, nice to see him come up clutch for the Rangers here. He's still been playing, I think, fairly well overall. He obviously still brings that physicality every night, but the scoring well is kind of run dry for Will Cuylle until this one. And, I was going to say, hopefully that gets him going, but then you remember, there's 2 weeks of vacation time here, essentially, for anybody not playing in the Four Nations. So hopefully he carries that into the home stretch here, whatever you want to call it, coming out of the break for the Four Nations. But we'll see how it goes there with Cuylle, but obviously coming up big for this team when they absolutely needed it. But in just a second, we're going to keep everything rolling. I want to shift our attention to one of the negatives from this game. We got to be fair here because, like I said, a lot of positives, a lot of negatives in this one, but the complete lack of a Ranger back check. I'm not the only person that noticed that in this game, in this season, certainly. So we'll discuss that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Download the app today or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you will score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here. Feels good to be celebrating a win, doesn't it? I mean, again, there's just been so many stretches of subpar or mediocre at best hockey for this team this season. But the bottom line, they do win 3 out of 4 going into this break here. And all 3 of those games that the Rangers won were the result of come-from-behind wins in the third period. And before this stretch, I think they had like one of those the entire season. That's not even an exaggeration. I believe they were sitting at 1 for quite some time. And obviously, they've stepped it up in that department as well recently. And they're going to need to kind of show that type of guts, that type of resiliency going forward for sure, if they're going to find a way to scratch and claw their way into the postseason. But for the everydayers, guys, shout you guys out as always. I'm thinking in our next episode, we might kind of just take some inventory and just kind of see how we got to this point in the season. You know, just kind of a broad look at how the Rangers have done this season. Got some exciting things planned for you guys throughout the 2-week break at the Four Nations. Certainly, we'll talk about the Four Nations a little bit, but I want to keep things pretty Rangers-centric on here. And we're actually going to have Johnny Lazarus on the show. Going to be talking to him on Monday night. The plan is for that episode to go out then on Tuesday. So if you have a question for Johnny, feel free to send it to me via email. The YouTube comment section should work as well. I'll try to keep an eye on that section for this episode if anybody has a question for Johnny. But for right now, let's go ahead and talk about one of the negative aspects of this game. And to be honest, I mean, let's be real here. One of the negative aspects of the Rangers this entire season, the complete lack of a back check, the seeming absence of effort on a back check. They don't do it. Like there's so many players on this team that just often, or at least sometimes, are not going to be bothered to back check. And it's maddening to watch this. I guess if nobody back checks, then you can't really single anybody out, right? I mean, nobody can lose ice time if nobody else is going to back check. Maybe that's it. Maybe they all have like this agreement that they're not going to back check. But in all seriousness, the Raiders, they kind of played their worst hits in this game in general. We're going to focus mostly on the back check, but I had to call out a couple other things real quick here. They did it again. They did the thing where a goal is scored and then they give up a goal on the next shift. That's exactly what happened. Rangers were playing very well in the first period, got up 1-0. Jackets scored on back-to-back shifts, took a 2-1 lead. All that hard work basically goes out the window. And again, it's great that they were resilient. They came back and they found a way to win this game, but my God, did they make it hard on themselves. And that's a habit that is just not going away. I mean, even last year, as good as this team was last year, as many games as they won, that was a problem last year too, and it's a major problem this season. So there was that. There was also, depending on what your definition of late in a period is, you can make an argument that they gave up another goal late in a period. There was 2:43 to go in the second period, but for a game of this magnitude, of this importance, and the fact that the score was tied at the time, I'm going to count that. They gave up another goal late in a period, so that made it 3-2 Jackets. And of course, again, awesome that the Rangers came back. But what I really want to focus on here is the back check. Although I will admit, it's kind of hard to critique something that does not actually exist. So I'm going to do my best here. But the Rangers just don't back check. And there's a vicious cycle going on right here. And not really a vicious cycle. I guess you got a vicious combination. The Rangers just flat out suck when it comes to defending the rush. I mean, that's a well-established fact this season. Steve Valiquette mentioned this during one of the intermissions. And I'm not exactly sure how he quantifies this, but he said that the Rangers ranked number 30 of 32 teams in the NHL when it comes to defending the rush. And I don't know if that's like a combination of how many odd man rushes do they give up, what percentage of rushes do the opponent score on. I don't know exactly where that number comes from, but if you look at the total body of work, yeah, I have no issue whatsoever believing that the Rangers are number 30 out of 32 teams when it comes to defending the rush. But that's compounded by the fact that they don't back check either. So you've got a team that can't defend the rush and apparently is either unable or unwilling to back check. Are guys just like that gas at the end of their shift? Is it just assuming that the goalie's going to bail them out, assuming that the defensemen are going to shut everything down? I don't know what it is, but the Ranger forwards, they have a serious issue when it comes to this. They just, they basically dog it on the back check. Every opposing team's rush into the Ranger zone pretty much goes like this. It's like a 3-on-2. The Ranger forwards are deep in the offensive zone, and they're very, very slow to go back. And they don't really move their legs. They just kind of glide. They reach out with their stick at the last minute. But like Joe Micheletti was saying, by then it's too late. You've given up too much ground, and that's all it takes to give up a goal and scoring chance. And in some cases, obviously a goal. So the forwards don't get back. And the defensemen, I've talked about this in the past too, but we saw that a couple of times in this game as well. They don't challenge the oncoming forwards. And I realize, you can't always just take a run at somebody and try to, go for this massive open ice hit because you could just as easily take yourself completely out of the play. But you're doing that anyway because what the Ranger defensemen so often do is they just backskate and backskate and backskate, and they give up so much ice. They let these players waltz right in and go right to the high danger scoring areas, and they just keep giving ground. They just keep going back and back. And I joked in maybe a week or two ago, I said, one of these times this is going to happen. One of the Ranger defensemen is going to be back skating while trying to defend the rush, and they're going to skate right behind the net and crash right into the backboards. Sooner or later, you watch, that will end up happening. But we saw this a couple of times in this game where the Ranger defensemen are giving up too much ground. The Ranger forwards, specifically the Lafreniere, Trocheck, and Cuylle line, just did not get back. I think all three of them were guilty of it at one time or another in this game. That line was, of course, on the ice for the second goal that the Jackets scored, as well as the third goal that the Jackets scored. But the biggest offender, I think, was Alexis Lafreniere, because he did it in the last game, too. He did it in the game against the Penguins, didn't get back, left his guy wide open. And I know Borgen took himself out of that play as well. So it was a team effort against the Penguins to really mess up that play. But Lafreniere did it 2 more times in this game. He's done it 3 times in the last 2 games. Buddy, you got to back check. You got to move. How old is Lafreniere at this point? 23, give or take? 22, 23? Shouldn't be this gassed. Got to move. I don't know. It'll drive you crazy. And again, I don't want to be too negative because they did win this game and they did it in dramatic fashion. But I had to get this off my chest to call out the back check here. There were also times in this game, of course, where the Rangers did what they always do and relied on their goalie to essentially save their bacon. We saw that a bunch of times in this game. Thought Jonathan Quick played very well, made some really tough saves. Ryan Lindgren, I thought, had another really shaky outing. There was one instance in particular where it was the end of the second period. The puck is behind the Ranger net. Lindgren has it. He's got somebody behind him, but he should be able to protect the puck here, and he can't. He just gives it away. He just kind of fumbles the puck. The Jackets end up getting 2 quality scoring chances in the final 10 seconds. Quick is able to freeze the puck. So Quick really bailed out the Rangers and bailed out Lindgren there. But yeah, I mean, look, bottom line, we know there are certain things that this Ranger team needs to do better. And I think just about all of them were on display, but none more so than the lack of a back check, the lack of effort, the lack of moving your legs when it comes to the back check. We've seen it over and over this season, and we saw it several times in this game too. But in just a second, we're going to shift gears again. I want to go ahead and talk about some of these eyebrow-raising line combinations that the Rangers came up with before this game. I mean, I guess in some ways it worked, right? They got 4 goals. They looked completely lethargic against the Penguins. So it was nice to see them have a little more energy, create a couple more scoring chances. And I think for the most part, these new line combinations sort of worked, but I'm going to elaborate on that in just a second and break down all these combos and talk about what might be next, if they might stick with these lines coming out of the break. And we will do that in just a second. Okay, new line combination. So let's just go through it here. You have a top line of Artemi Panarin, JT Miller. So far, so good, right? I mean, they're your 2 most skilled players. I think they have a chance to play off of each other very well. We've seen some of that already. I think they can complement each other very well. Who's on the right wing? Jimmy Vesey. Jimmy Vesey, who I believe was a healthy scratch for 9 consecutive games. That's if that's off, it's not off by more than a game or 2. Not good enough to play for approximately 9 consecutive games. Then he comes back. He's back for like 2 games before this one on the fourth line. All of a sudden, Jimmy Vesey's good enough to play on the Ranger top line. Try to figure that one out. That's a weird one. I have a theory as to why maybe they did this. I'll just say it now. I was going to save it, but let's just talk about it now. Maybe the feeling here is that the Rangers want to spread the wealth a little bit, so to speak, just kind of have lines that are a little bit more balanced. And maybe the thought process here from Peter Laviolette is that if I'm going to have Panarin and JT on one line, then that's already, like, at least in theory, a really good line, a really dangerous line. And I'll just put somebody that's usually going to be in my bottom 6 on the top line with them and just hope that, Jimmy Vesey in this case can hold his own, can keep up with them, and, obviously chip in offensively, from time to time as well. Maybe that's part of it. That allows you to spread the wealth, like I was saying. Case in point, your second line in this game was the aforementioned Cuylle, Trocheck, and Lafreniere line. We talked about them in great detail just a second ago, so I don't think we have to elaborate on them any further. But again, truly a mixed bag for that line because the back-checking effort was just inexcusable. But they did come up big. I mean, you can't take that away from them either. They came up massive for this team in the third period. Then the third line, left to right, Kreider, Mika, and Kaliev. Kaliev, by the way, got back into the lineup here. He had been a healthy scratch for the last couple of games, and really nice individual effort. There's that term again. We used it with Will Cuylle a little bit earlier, but Kaliev on this play goes up the left side, and he's got a guy bearing down on him, and does a really nice job here using his frame to kind of shield the puck away from, the oncoming defender. Almost kind of like gave a little bit of a back check, a very subtle one. But bottom line, he circles the net, he keeps possession of the puck, and then he scores on a wraparound and opens the scoring for the Rangers. So that was obviously nice to see. And as for Kreider and Mika, when the JT Miller trade went through, what I was hoping would happen was exactly what we saw here, that Kreider and Mika would both be out of the top 6. They didn't do that right away. Of course, Kreider was out of the top 6, but he had been out of the top 6 anyway. But what they did was they put, initially, Mika up there with Miller and Panarin, and Mika was playing the right wing. What's curious about this change now, and I realize part of the reason for this might have been just how bad the Rangers played in the last game, so you got to shake things up and try something different. But what's really interesting about this to me is that Mika's been playing better recently. That's first and foremost. But also in the last game, the most recent game against the Penguins, I know the Rangers were terrible in that game, but that's kind of beside the point here. In that game, Laviolette gives Mika Zibanejad more than 22 minutes of ice time. So, again, to recap here, when JT Miller came over, I'm thinking like, okay, now is the time to move Mika down to the third line. They didn't do it. But then Mika starts playing better. And then you're coming off a game where he had 22 minutes, and now you bust him down to the third line? That's a weird one, right? And again, I'm not complaining that much because in general, Kreider and Mika just haven't been good enough this season. So them being on the third line does not upset me in the slightest. But the timing of it is just so weird when you see how Mika's been playing quite a bit better over the last handful of games here. But the other thought that I had watching this line, because I feel like this line actually played pretty well in this game, at least compared to, in the case of Mika and Kreider, what we've been getting from them for most of the season. Mika did have a multiple-point game. Kreider had an assist for what that's worth. But I did have a thought watching this as well. So it's Mika and Kreider, your two supposed leaders, your two supposed star players. And now they've got another guy on the right wing. You can add this to the ever-growing list of players that have played on the right wing with Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider. And who's the right winger? It's Arthur Kaliev, a guy that the Rangers picked up on waivers. And the thought that I had watching this was, could you imagine if Arthur Kaliev is what these two needed to finally get it going, to finally step it up, to finally have them as effective as they were when Pavel Buchnevich was on their line? It's this 23-year-old kid that was waived by the Kings. They couldn't even get a late-round draft pick for him. That would really be something else. And certainly we're going to need to see more evidence than just this game. But Kaliev scored a goal. Mika scored a goal. All three of them got on the score sheet. I think this is mostly a good night for this line, at least compared to, like I said, in the case of Mika and Kreider, what we've gotten from them for most of the season. So mostly good stuff from that line, mostly. The fourth line then, you've got Riley Smith all the way down to the fourth line, Sam Carrick and Matt Rempe. Rempe's played very well recently. And there's people that I get the feeling don't really watch a lot of Ranger hockey. And that's fine. I mean, it's not like I sit here and watch every game that, every Ranger division rival plays. But there's people that go after Matt Rempe and they go with this lazy narrative that like he doesn't know how to play hockey and all this stuff. And he's just out there to be a goon. If you watch Matt Rempe over the last handful of games, he's still out there using his size to his advantage. He's still throwing some hits here and there, but they're a little bit more measured. And look, I mean, that kind of annoys me in and of itself because Matt Rempe, just because he's bigger than his opponents, should not have to hit people later. As long as the hit is clean, he should be able to hit people as hard as he wants. But the bottom line, he has adjusted his game a little bit. He's getting a decent amount of shots on goal every game. He came very close to scoring on a rush in this one. It was a 2-on-1. Carrick made a centering pass to his right to Rempe, and Rempe almost got the tip-in goal there. Rempe has played better recently, and we've been impressed, or at least I have, and I think most Ranger fans have been impressed by this fourth line in general. Obviously, they have to go forward without Adam Edstrom, which is obviously very unfortunate, but Rempe's played well, and Carrick, I think, plays his role to a T. He's not a superstar, we know that, but for a fourth line center, I think he's done a nice job this year. And seeing Riley Smith on the fourth line was a little bit weird, but it didn't really bother me that much either. This is the guy that the Rangers, for like half a decade, that's not even really an exaggeration. I think it goes back about that far, have been obsessed with acquiring this guy in one way or another. When he was on Vegas, the Rangers were always, they love Riley Smith. They're always calling up Vegas, trying to strike some kind of a deal, trying to bring Riley Smith to New York. He gets traded to Pittsburgh, spends one season there, and now you finally bring in Riley Smith. And I don't know, man. I don't see it. Like, he's had some moments here and there, and, he'll give you some secondary scoring. I guess you could do worse for a depth forward, but the Rangers, the franchise's obsession with this player for the last handful of years, didn't get it at the time, and certainly don't get it now that he's a member of this Ranger team. And I don't even think he played poorly in this one. He came pretty close to scoring on a breakaway, almost five-holed the goalie. Again, I thought the fourth line overall played well, but this is the guy that you wanted that badly. And now, he's a healthy scratch the one time earlier this year, just one game, but still. And now he's on the fourth line while Jimmy Vesey is on the top line. So I don't know, man. There were some strange things going on here, but the one thing I'll say in Laviolette's defense, that game against the Penguins was an abomination. And so I think he felt the need to try something a little bit different. They did that. And now the question is, do they stick with this lineup coming out of the Four Nations break here? I think that they should. I mean, it's 2 weeks. Maybe the Rangers call up an Offman. Maybe Berard's ready to go by then. They call him up. That's at least possible as well. But I'd like to see these line combinations get another go in the next game coming out of the Four Nations break. The only other change to the lineup was that Urho Vakanainen is over his illness, which means the Rangers send Zach Jones back to his room. He's banished there until somebody either gets sick or injured or the like. I can't go crazy about it because Vakanainen, I think, has mostly played well since the Rangers brought him over, but just the fact that it's just like impossible for Zach Jones to get a game when the other six defensemen are healthy, a little bit disheartening and a little bit hard to understand. I mentioned Lindgren earlier. They're not going to bench him. I think there's a respect factor there. He's been a grizzled veteran, hard-nosed player for this team for a long time. But I just watched Lindgren play, and this is coming from a big Ryan Lindgren fan. You guys know the everydayers. He's been one of my favorite players. I watch him play now, and I just can't for a second imagine that he's a better option than Zach Jones. And I realize they play two, vastly different styles, but just in terms of like, okay, who's more likely to do positive things that are going to result in a win for this team? I don't know how you come to the conclusion that Lindgren gives you the better chance. And Vakanainen's played well. You know what? Zach Jones can sub in for Vakanainen. Vakanainen can be a healthy scratch once every 8 or 10 games. I don't think that would be the worst thing in the world either. I talked about that in greater length in a recent episode, but just wanted to throw that out there. I think there's a good chance that Zach Jones is going to get dealt. We've talked about that off and on. I think this might be the trade deadline season that it finally happens, but we will see. A couple other quick notes about this game before we call it. Jonathan Quick, again, I thought very good in this game. Igor Shesterkin dealing with an injury. It's honestly, if you believe the injury timetable, one of the more inconsequential injuries that you'll ever see, because I don't think Igor was going to play in this game anyway. I threw out that possibility in the last episode, but the back-to-back, they tend to always go with, one of the goalies in one game, the other goalie in the other game. So I think this is always going to be Quick's matchup here against the Jackets. But the reason I say it's an inconsequential injury is because the timetable for Igor is that he will be back in 1 or 2 weeks. And that's exactly 2 weeks is exactly how long of a break that the Rangers have between now and their next game. So you never want to get injured, and it's unfortunate that Igor's dealing with whatever he's dealing with. In fact, I think we know, the last game he was there's a play stoppage. He got bumped into. He was shaking his wrist during the stoppage and play there. So I would imagine that's probably what's going on here, and that's probably the injury. But yeah, I mean, obviously all the best to Igor. We hope he gets healthy, but never a good time to get injured. I suppose if you have to pick one, though, this is it right here. So hopefully he gets healthy and doesn't even end up missing a single game. And speaking of the first game out of the break, Rangers are going to be playing the Buffalo Sabres. That will happen on Saturday, February 22nd at 5:30 p.m. So again, exactly 2 weeks. And you know what? The Rangers have to come out and absolutely slaughter that team. The Sabres are no good. The last time I checked, they were the bottom of the Eastern Conference. I think that's still where they are. They were the worst team by a fairly comfortable margin. So I'd imagine they're still there. And look, I know 2 weeks off. Oh, hey, the Rangers might be rusty. You know what? I don't care. I don't care if they're rusty. You got to come out. You got to impose your will. Everybody should be fresh. Everybody should get a mental refresh as well. Because other than, I think, 6 total players, I think, for the Rangers. 4 for USA, 1 for Sweden, 1 for Finland. Everybody else is off. Everybody else can basically do what they want. Come back refreshed and ready to rock and roll. Rangers only have a handful of games left before the trade deadline. It's your last chance to make an impression, stake your claim to the GM that we're going to go forward, we're going to push for a playoff spot, and not to start trading us away left and right. So, yep, figure we can call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @jchick17. Once again, @jchik17. And definitely subscribe to the Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.